To show how to throw an exception from your own code, I'm going to use the person class that I've used in other demos before. A person has a first name, a last name, and an arbitrary number, which carries no meaning at all. It just gives me an opportunity to pass integers around. I've modified my person constructor a little bit. I take first name, last name, and arbitrary number and save them into my variables, but I've added a body to the constructor. And in this body, I test to see if the arbitrary number is 0, and if it is, I throw an exception. Now, in order to be able to throw this exception, I need to include standard except, and I'm throwing the invalid argument exception, which inherits from the exception class. And the constructor for this exception, like all of them, takes a string, and I'm passing in this one, arbitrary number for a person cannot be 0. Let's go into the main, and somewhere before this bad thing happens here, let's construct a person that deliberately breaks those rules. So I'll make a person called Kate. And provide an arbitrary number of 0, knowing, because it's a demo and I want the bad thing to happen, that this will trigger the throw down inside the person constructor. Now we still have a catch block left over to catch an out of range exception that happens when this line is executed, and I have my generic, hey, catch any exception that inherits from the class exception. We'll leave them both there and both with their breakpoints, and I'm going to run the application. So let's start stepping along. You can see that as soon as we tried to construct the invalid person, Control jumped down into this catch block. We totally skipped the line of code that was trying to get to the bad part of the vector. That's an important part of exceptions being thrown. Nothing else gets run. And we're down here. We did not get caught in the out of range exception because that wasn't what we triggered. We triggered that invalid argument exception. If I hover over E, you can see the message there, arbitrary number for a person cannot be 0. And if I expand it out like this, you can also see that it says here invalid argument. That's an important piece of information. I only caught the exception as an exception, not as an invalid argument, but I can still see its type. And that's because we've caught it polymorphically with the reference. We caught it by reference. In fact, let me show you what happens if I don't catch it by reference. Just take that symbol away and run. No other change. We still end up in the catch. And that's why leaving off the punctuation is sort of a seductive error, because, hey, I caught the exception. That's great. But if I hover over it, I still see that same message, arbitrary number for a person cannot be 0. But if I expand it, you'll notice we no longer notice here the class name of invalid argument. We lost that information. We've actually suffered slicing. Talked about slicing when we were talking about polymorphism. Now, since there are no extra member variables or member functions in the derived classes from the standard exception class, you may think slicing doesn't matter, but we lost the type. We lost that it was an invalid argument. And if this string was something like, boy, are you stupid, then we wouldn't know anything at all about what had gone wrong. That's why when you're catching exceptions that are in a hierarchy, simply remember to always catch them by reference so that you gain the benefits of polymorphism and you don't suffer slicing.